Hello and welcome to the CAM podcast. I'm the host, Warwick Slow. Today's episode is about how to do 100 mil in lending per year as a mortgage advisor. Even if you're not a mortgage advisor, there's some great takeaways that we're going to discuss today. And don't take my word for it, because what do I know? I've actually brought someone in who's done that, 100 mil of lending. He's head of advice at MortgageHQ. Great guy. It's Simon McDonald. Welcome to the CAM podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining. It's going to be some key takeaways here. And I know that you've performed at a high level and you've been part of teams which have performed at high levels. So I want to dive into those different areas. And one of the parts I wanted to talk about was, the type of volume you're doing across your team. Mm-hmm. Is that typical? Is that expected?
It is expected. And you might ask, like, how do we do that in the company? And it really comes down to team. It's a team sport, right? You can't compete as an individual when others are competing in teams. And so we have A players from support staff all the way up to the managing director. And that's what allows us to do what we do, both quality and quantity.
Mate, fantastic. And what does it actually look like on a day-to-day basis hitting that type of number?
There's a lot of repetitive anchors in place to ensure that you hit those numbers. You have to take on a lot of responsibility, and a lot of that comes with, if you can't quite get that done in working hours, you might have to extend and get that done. Yeah.
And I hear it all the time from advisors. A lot of the times, if you want to hit those high numbers and be high performing, sometimes it does mean long hours.
Yeah. So prep the wife or the girlfriend that you might not be home,
or husband, or other.
Or husband.
Other.
Sorry,
yep,
yes,
for
of
sure.
course. That you might not be home on every single day at the time that you said you were. If that's important to you, right? Like if those numbers mean something to you, then there's sacrifices in other areas that have to be made.
The first part I want to talk about is top of funnel, because to do that type of volume, you need to have leads, or you need to have customers to speak to, new business as well. I know that MortgageHQ does a lot in the marketing space, and that must be like where a large majority of your leads come through. Mm-hmm. But like maybe if you were trying to aim for like 10 meetings per week, let's say that's a figure, would that be close to what you were trying to hit?
Yeah, it's what we aspire to. It's what we push for the junior advisors coming through, that they are to try to get 10 meetings in advance to the week. And that's really setting you up for that 100 million a year.
So 10 meetings a week is
10 new meetings.
Yeah,
new app review meetings. That's not even considering the loan structures that you have to do for existing clients, the follow-up calls, the prospecting calls, the company meetings, right? So 10 a week, it's a decent amount.
For your new clients that are coming through, you're calling them up. And I know Blandon's been on the podcast previously, who used to be one of the owners at MortgageHQ, and he says the two key metrics that his top advisors were doing is who's making the most phone calls, who's having the most meetings. Mm-hmm. For your existing clients, is that, I know a lot of people are going to be listening to this and they're like, well, it's great, I don't have this huge marketing engine that you've got. Like, what are some tips and tricks that you would do or recommend people to implement if they were in maybe a smaller business with 1 to 5 advisors?
Yeah, I think brand is huge. I know, like you say, some people may be watching this and say, oh, well, you can lean on that brand. And we do, like that is a big part of the business. And this is what it comes back down to when I said team, you have a team aspect. But if I was starting out on my own, I would still take that as a top priority. You can go as far as jumping into your contact list and going through and calling as much as possible, going through your social medias, but having some sort of anchor, and I'll come back to this, anchor is huge. Whether you outsource that within your company or not, or you're doing it yourself, you need to have that consistency to bring in the flow, so that you're not just relying on ups and downs. If you're going hard on the marketing and building a brand, and then prospecting separately, and then dealing with that deal flow once it comes in, it's going to dip off in terms of the deal flow coming in from that front end. So it's really important that those are consistent across days, weeks, months, as opposed to focusing on different areas at different times of the year.
Okay, and then the juggling act, time management is really important. I know you're traditionally a very early starter, usually second in the office at MortgageHQ. So how do you structure your day in terms of making sure that you're most effective?
I think it comes down to I don't know if even anyone's seen that YouTube video where the guy's got this big glass container and he puts in the big pebbles first, the smaller ones after, and then the sand. And that's what really helps you fill that cup. So I recommend that people look at that. They think, what's the most important things in my life? And it may not necessarily be this. It may not necessarily be work. But if you put those things in first, then you've got much more room to think, okay, that's been taken care of. My mental health's right. My physical health is right. My family is okay. I've got that support. Now I can really go hard in these smaller marbles to ensure that that consistency is there. Once it's locked in, then it's about just making sure that you do it, right? It's very easy to say, oh, I've got that to do right now, but I'll concentrate on this call that's coming in right now. And so it's about being disciplined in that area.
And it's very hard. Like the role of an advisor, often people are calling you, hey, I've got this property I want to look at. And it might not necessarily be adding to the bottom line because they just want to chat to you as a friend.
Yes, yeah.
So it's like, how do you focus that energy? And I think the marbles, sand, rocks is like a really good way of putting it together. I did a podcast a while ago with Nathan McDonald, and one of the things that he said that he does is that he'll do 10 difficult ones before 10 a.m. Those like really big, juicy, maybe the clients are a little bit thirstier that require a bit more hand-holding. The more difficult ones gets them out of the way early. Because when you've got that difficult task in the back of your mind, the amount of mental real estate that takes up can have a knock-on effect for the rest of your day. And one thing that I do personally is I try and run like an inbox zero. And I know a lot of people, advisors, who they use their inbox as like a to-do list.
Yes.
Which is, as soon as you've got that set up and you're marking things as unread to come back to it later, you're almost doomed. You need to be running it through 4 filters. It's do, takes less than 2 minutes, get it done. Delete if it's irrelevant. Delegate, forward to somebody else in the team if you can. If you don't have an admin support person, look at, is that going to be a beneficial use of equity or capital in your business? And then the last one is defer. So I put all the difficult things into a pile and then like tackle those in an allocated hour spot.
Yeah, schedule them out, and then actually do them when it comes up, Don't just delay,
Sometimes you defer and then delete at the end anyway. So, but just being really brutal with that sometimes, and it can be challenging, but it'll change your life.
Yes, I can't agree more.
So we talk about those anchors and non-negotiables. When somebody joins the team and you're coaching them into getting to that mindset, like what are some key things that you have to bring them on side for, maybe like educate them that you've found really powerful?
A lot of them are the soft skills. It's easy to see when you question someone about, say, their credit brain or their credit understanding. Someone can be a whiz in that area, but if they're not turning up to the training on time, or if they're not prioritizing certain aspects of the business, you can tell that over time that's going to drag them down. And so it's about, I would much rather someone who's younger, inexperienced, and coachable, who has got the right mindset, than someone who's been in the industry for ages, knows everything, and doesn't have that grit like the others do.
I spoke with an advisor, and they've been in the industry a very long time. I won't reveal their name, but they've gone through the process of hiring and bringing people through. And one of the things they said is that you get different types of people, and some who have no experience are really effective because they're great at communicating it in simple terms to the end clients. You sometimes get people who might have a bit more experience in putting deals together. And he said that can sometimes be a hindrance because if they've been in like an admin support role, they're relentlessly focused on getting all this information across and like packaged in this perfect way, when really it's not adding any value, but it's taking them an extra hour, 2 hours to get that same task done. How do you audit or like check the team to make sure that they're being effective with their time? Is it something you track, or you do have like a dashboard or KPIs?
Yeah, I mean, we try not to be too strict, but when there's outliers, that's when you can really tell. Conversion's huge. If you're doing the numbers, but it's not converting into deals, we drill down a little bit from a perspective of, how can we work together to make this better for you? They clearly want this better. They don't want to be working all day and not settle deals. So we focus on, from a supportive perspective, how can we get you to perform at a better level? And in a lot of cases, it comes down to, like you say, the communicating complex ideas in a simple way to clients, understanding that they are, in most cases, outside our industry and need that support and that clarity. And if you can do that, it goes a long way.
It's that same old debate, how can you get really good customer outcomes so they get an outcome that they're stoked with in the most efficient way possible? What are some ways that you see people wasting time and they might not realize that they look busy and they feel busy, but that's not amounting to revenue?
Yeah, I think it comes down to making it easy for yourself and the client. So if you have systems in place, we talked about that time where you're taking that call, right? When you should be head down completing an application for submission or something like that, right? And in that case, what you would do is you would have, say, an automated redirecting or an automated text that you can send to the client with them easily being able to book in immediately after that time slot, for example, right? And if you have no buffer times and the capacity to differentiate between a quick call and a meeting and the need for that, by allowing the client to do that for you, outsourcing that work, it reduces your need to have to take calls, answer texts, answer emails immediately, make it easy for them, make it easy for you. And then when the time slots arrive, because of their pre-booking, it makes it a lot easier. You're a lot more prepared in advance. I'll give you an example. I have, and I'm sure a lot of people watching, they'll have blocked out full application reviews with clients. And in between, you might have half an hour slot here, 10-minute slot there. And in a lot of cases, what people do is and then go get a coffee and talk to the colleague or whatever. Instead, what you could do is you could have that available for a quick booking, 10-minute chat, that two of those people who called you had the link and booked in immediately. So if you don't have a buffer in the calendar and that allows you, and you're responsive to your calendar, then that can drive a lot of behavior. One of the other things is, if you have your support staff, redirecting cancelled bookings and bringing other clients forward, a massive sales technique where you say, this person cannot make it today, but I've got this person who's saying it's urgent, who's on the later end of the week, who is available. You bring that forward, you've got the next slot available for the next prospect. It really picks up the pace over time. Yeah, so I'd say systems.
Okay, I want to talk about two things with that then. The calendar, is that something that you're like, is your whole day booked up in terms of meetings and slots?
Well, except for, say, like a 15-minute slot, and that's what allows the clients who really need to speak to me to get advice for the team to move forward, allows them to slip in, right? I can take notes, have a quick call, get the application moving forward, pass it on or delegate it to others to move forward within and in between meetings. I always try to have these small little slots between meetings, and you can do that by having a buffer zone after, say, the bigger meetings.
Like Calendly has that. I'm sure any
Exactly.
other calendar tool will have that type of functionality.
But don't, like you mentioned this before, don't be directed by your calendar, by your inbox. Do the same thing with your calendar as well. Do it multifaceted. It's your calendar, it's your inbox, it's your team, right? And your team can collate information as well and reduce the back and forward and say, this is the stuff we need you to respond to. And then you have that system in place. Yeah.
And your team, you see that if there's someone who cancels, they'll try and book someone else in. A lot of the time, like I've done sales before, you jump into the meeting, that person hasn't arrived, and you're going,
yeah,
which in some ways can be a blessing, especially if you've got a big pipe of things to do.
Yeah.
Anyway, do you have a process where the team is like actively following up with people prior to the meeting? So if someone's going to cancel, they book it in, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, you're aware of obviously the booking automated texts that go out to the client, hey, you've got a meeting up in 15 minutes or whatever it is. That's one layer, right? And then we also have the use of VAs and some of the new staff that are coming through. Part of their training is to support the other advisors to do those calls in advance. Hey, you've got this, and so early in the morning or the day before. Tomorrow you got this meeting at 11:30 with Simon. Does that time still work for you? Just confirming these are the areas that are most important for you, and this is the end goal for the meeting. Does that make sense? Yes, good. And there's a couple of little tricks and techniques that we use to ensure that they're ready. And then obviously just before the meeting, a quick text and little things like that make all the difference. Now, obviously you can't make that perfect all the time. The associate may be busy in a meeting or whatever, and there are. But if you reduce the amount of times that happens, you can and that compounds over weeks, months, and years, it makes a massive difference.
Love it. We've talked a little bit about it, but that art of first appointments and conversion, you want to give them as much context upfront as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But what are some other things that you can do to like really fill in that? Sorry, what am I trying to say? So we're trying to make sure that meeting is efficient as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I know that like sending like the fact find from Trail would be another big part of the process, making sure people have completed that.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other things that you try and do to like really prime that customer so that appointment or app review is like super valuable?
Yeah. So it starts with the initial call, what we call GPCT. I don't know if you use that. Yeah, goals, plans, challenges, time frame. And so you would want to really dive a little bit deeper in that holistically, so that you know the motivations of the client, right? And continue to use those motivations that the client gave you to emphasize the importance of turning up to the meeting on time, making the Zoom works, and even just having the support staff mention this to how many times have you turned up to a meeting and the client's like, oh, I've been struggling trying to log in for Zoom. They made me do an update, right? So just print them. You might want to show up 10 minutes early because there's always Zoom trying to get you to do an update, right? And we want to make sure that this is as productive as possible so that you can get into that home that's really important for you, right? That last part, right? Anchoring it into what's important to them.
I think you've answered it really well, and there's a couple of the things that I've heard as well, is where if you're saying all of the value is towards getting them to their first home, a lot of the time people it could be like sending the fact find out or getting the customer to do or engage with anything prior to the meeting. What advisors I see sometimes making the mistake of is they say the value of the customer doing that is for the advisor. Oh, you do that, it'll mean that we don't have to fill it out when you get in.
Ah, yes.
But if they're pitching the benefit to the customer, you're a very busy person. You're a solicitor, or you're a tradie, and you only get like a certain amount of time per day. I want to make sure that this 30-minute meeting is like super important, super valuable, and it's really important that you go through and you fill out this form, or you do this research, or that here's this article I wrote about, buying your first property. You need to read that with your partner prior to that meeting so that we can make the most of that time.
Yeah. I fundamentally agree with that. I think it's part of the overall sales component as well. Like, you're not here to sell a product that doesn't work for the client as well. And so I love not having to hard sell. You don't have to do that. You find the solutions for the clients, and you say, this is the solution for you. This is yours. This is how we get you to where you're wanting to go. So coming back to those goals, really understanding it. So that initial call, having that information ready for the advisor, and as the advisor as well, prepare for your meetings, right? Have a quick read through that last conversation. If you're doing volume, you're going to forget who this person is as it comes up for the meeting. So spend 5 minutes looking through the notes that you had the conversation with, if you did, all your support staff, really narrowing down what's important for the client, and use that in your introduction. The introduction is so powerful, right? Like, you get onto this call with the client, you say to them, hey, I had a quick look through the profile information with the previous calls, and it looks like X is the thing that's really important to you. I assume that's what you want to focus on in this meeting, right? And then subsequent to that, you want to have a very clear and productive agenda for your meeting. And this comes with compliance as well. You want to make sure that you tick off certain aspects of that meeting. Like, for example, your scope of advice. You want to make sure that that's in the forefront of the meeting. We try to combine the scope of advice with an introduction of who you are as an advisor, why you want to listen to me, and the areas that you are going to be providing advice in that scope, and using it as an introductory tool, but making it very easy for them to understand what advice you're going to be providing for in that meeting.
And when setting the agenda, will you just lay out the agenda and like that's it? Or will you have a portion where you say, well, look, this is what I think we should talk about. Are there any other things you want to discuss or add to that agenda?
Yeah, I find we have a relatively strict agenda, but in the second, after you discuss the nature and scope, we go into the client goals. That's where it gets quite malleable. You want to be flexible in how the client wants to focus on certain areas. There's an unlimited amount of things that you could discuss with the client. We could go into all the different types of policies with all the different banks and possibilities and variations and things. But if their priority is one thing, then you want to hyper focus on that, both because that's what you're there to do for the client, and also it really always comes back to the client goals. And we can have all the objectives in the world, but it always needs to be solidly grounded in the client's expectations and their goals.
And sometimes customers don't care about all of the detail. I just think back to someone in my personal network who dealt with an advisor, and I remember them coming away from it saying, mate, say less, I'm keen, let's just do it.
Yes.
But there's always the balancing act because you've got your compliance obligations.
Yes.
There's certain things you have to talk about, but how do you balance that with customers who just want to get going?
Soft skills. It really comes down to that. Really reading the person. Does the person really understand what we're saying here? Are they just brushing over and they're just saying, oh, I give you all my full trust, let's go for an investment property, and then you put them down this false sense of security. You need to be able to ask the qualifying questions. Not only did this person hear me, but did they understand, right? And so if you can get good at that, then you can reduce the scope of the conversations that you go down in terms of rabbit holes. You can find the areas where they may not have the understanding, go down that rabbit hole, and then you get that light bulb moment, in a meeting, and they're like, wow, this guy is providing so much value because he's focusing on the areas that they haven't heard a million times, and really things start to click in for them. Yeah.
And that curiosity and asking questions is so important because it's easy to say, here's a structure you follow that you ask these types of questions. Sometimes like getting that extra bit of information out can be the difference between, having that client for life or, losing them. What are some little things that you've found have worked quite well to just get like beneath that surface level, I want to buy a house? Like what are some questions that you can probe that just maybe get a slightly better response from customers?
Live it. And what I mean by that is like, if you've got these products, say, for example, the insurance, KiwiSaver and mortgages, what are you doing in your personal life to grow your wealth? Right? If you're doing that all day, every day, and you immerse yourself in that, then that's where we find advisors really do very well when they are investors, that they are taking their families and their personal wealth seriously, that they are protecting it, that they are diversifying it, that they are looking at ways to be, in the investment, property investment world, what are the areas that we can focus on and pull levers to make massive changes to your wealth. If you can provide that in a way that you can communicate to the client that these are areas that I've had experience in, and be curious and get them to be curious, provide some maybe referrals and networks to be able to increase their knowledge in that space, with also ensuring that the scope of advice is very easily communicated to the client. You can go a long way in building that trust with the client. So I'd say do what you're saying you're doing,
I can, totally relate to that. I remember when I first joined the industry and I just moved back to New Zealand, went through into the course trained level 5 course, and then I started going through the process of buying my first home with my partner. And it was it really connected a lot of the dots for me, and it made it a lot easier to engage with advisors because you'd gone through that process. You can experience the pain that they can. The friction points, the difficult challenges. Getting in and getting that first-hand experience, it's going to be so much more valuable, and you'll learn. It's that classic line of, you learn more in your first week of real work than you do like doing your entire degree.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, and it becomes absolutely apparent when it comes to wanting to get good ROI on the clients you work with as well, right? Like if you're trying to aim for that area of a certain debt level, right, to make it commercial a difference in the business, is that you're really looking for people that are a possible refinance restructure that benefits them plus a new purchase in the same kind of breath. that obviously reduces your workflow, but also massively adds to the value for the client. And so if you've been there, done that, and there's areas that you can communicate, and the best way I like doing it is asking the questions to the client. Have you considered this? Because that's not advice, right? Like, have you considered this? Have you maybe wanting to ask the lawyer this question or the accountant that question? And what would happen if that happened? And preemptively, as opposed to being, oh, we've gone unconditional, we're about to settle, and I've got all these questions that now I know I need to answer. No, if you had those questions in advance, then it's going to put the client in a much better position.
Open-ended questions have so much value too. And sometimes it can be really difficult to evidence that a client understands the advice that's been given. And I feel that the best advisors, they set it up in a way where they almost educate the customer to make their own decision based on the information that's been given, but the advisor is almost not making a recommendation. The client's coming to you and saying, well, I've actually thought about it and this is what I want to do. That right there is a great outcome. And also for the advisor, it shows you're doing a great job too.
It's an area we're trying to work on because we have actually super experienced advisors who are actual superstars in the investment space themselves, gone into developments and so how do you communicate that in a way that is, like you say, opening questions, getting the client to come to their own realization as opposed to providing advice that's outside your scope? Right? So we're really working on those soft skills to bolster the knowledge that we know the advisors have.
Yeah, and I know as head of advice, like compliance is super important to you, and I know that's something that you work really closely with your team to get great outcomes for. I want to talk about tools and scaling and getting those little marginal gains. We've spoken about your calendar use or your Calendly. I'm not sure if you use that tool. Obviously using Trail. Are there any other little tools that you would recommend to a business that's maybe a bit smaller scale than MHQ that they can implement that can make a massive difference?
I would say you need to be constantly thinking about how you integrate AI into the systems. You need to have an AI policy, so it needs to come from the top, right? Those conversations need to be part of the risk committee if the business is regularly meeting to go through these things. How do you utilize these tools? Because if you're not constantly thinking about this and innovating, you're going to be left behind. The difference between someone who can effectively use these tools and not, and the amount of workload you can handle is day and night. So if you want to remain competitive, you have to be thinking about how you incorporate the likes of Gemini, OpenAI, ChatGPT, all these different types of, and there's a whole heap more than that. So there's a couple of things that you can do. There's newsletters, AI newsletters, setting aside time in your day, both for the senior leaders and senior advisors to communicate together on how they can use some of these new technologies in systems. So constantly innovate in the business. Connectivity between the existing systems, and then continuing to ask Trail how they can incorporate some of these things as well.
Add it on the list.
Yeah.
Now, what are some ways that you've used AI to save you time during the day?
Yeah, I think we spoke about this just before the podcast about how I don't think AI is going to be replacing anyone anytime soon in this industry, specifically with the advisors. Is that actually it's people who integrate AI that is just going to take off compared to other people in that industry. You have to remain the expert. You have to proofread the things that when you use these tools. But ultimately, some of the things that we're doing is we're incorporating Gemini and these other products to summarize some of the notes. Specific way I go about it is that I continue to take manual notes based on how I know I can interpret what the client and I are saying based on the journey of the objectives of the application and formulate the notes in that manner. And then you take the transcript and you ask AI to actually utilize and prioritize the notes you've made in relation to the full transcript and the objectives you're trying to produce in the summary emails or the disclosure emails. And in doing that, you're getting a much better outcome. And then quick proofread, couple of little changes, and you're off. Where that kind of thing could take you half an hour can take you minutes now. So it's amazing tools. Yeah.
And it is powerful but there are also flaws to it. And like I've seen this before. Sometimes you'll be asking it a question about a subject that you're really knowledgeable about, and it gets things wrong. I'm like, no, that's not actually true. And so with that comes to go, okay, well, can I trust it to make sure that it gets everything right 100% of the time? And there might be a really important detail that you've discussed with the client. It's been discussed one way, but how it gets summarized and put into the transcript could be interpreted in a different way. Other than the ways you mentioned there, are there any other little like tips or tricks that you would recommend to get those little marginal gains as well?
Outside of the technology space?
Yeah.
If I switch to more mindset, I would say like taking extreme ownership of things. When things don't go wrong, we as humans usually have a tendency to try to find a blame, like, oh, it didn't work out because of this, right? And if you just catch yourself doing that and saying, no, everything that goes wrong is my fault, then I promise you that mindset's going to serve you well over long term. So if a problem comes up, you should say, hey, great, we've got this opportunity to figure out how we can make sure that this doesn't happen in the future on aggregate, right? And so being in that mindset, taking in the information with excitement to make improvements, and then just make a conscious effort to improve all day, every day, and every week and every month.
It's not your fault. It is your fault. Sort of the opposite of that scene in Good Will Hunting with, I'm not sure if you've seen it, with Matt Damon and Robin Williams, where he just keeps saying, it's not your fault, not your fault. You're like, every time, it is your fault, it is your fault, get better.
Yeah. I mean, you got to balance that. You don't want to be putting yourself down constantly and that be part of the like a dark cloud over you kind of mindset. But I promise you, when you take on these and you make wins because of that attitude, it's much easier to feel good about yourself because of the track history of the things you've done than trying to project an image of who you are in the future that you haven't achieved yet. So evidence is the thing that really pushes you forward. And so you can do that really, you talked about doing the hard things first in the morning. So on a micro level on a day, like if you just get up and do some exercise, how much better do you feel about yourself after that, right? And so this translates to business as well. So you got all these tech and all these things, but I think it's how do you integrate it? It comes from that mindset aspect of how can you improve every day and not looking at it as a problem, similar to like compliance or technology and all these other things that are changing. You look at it as how can we integrate that and make our service better?
You see that all the time with like high performing CEOs and sports stars and people who've made it to the very top. Often they have this insatiable appetite for improvement, and they're not often reflecting on what's been done in the past. They're just like thinking about what is the next thing? How can I improve? Is that something you try and coach in when you have a new advisor that comes in, trying to get that same mindset? Are you intentional about it?
Yeah, 100%. There is psychologically there is this. There are two ways that you can motivate. There is the projection and the fear of behind. And so when you look at it, say a mistake, you say, hey, look, that wasn't ideal. How do we make sure that it doesn't happen again? But also supporting them in practical tools. How do we actually, if you provide them a template, hey, these are the questions you should be asking about mistakes you've done in the past, and these are the things you want to do to implement it in the future, and here's a framework that's worked for us, then people can be slid into this and get quick, easy gains, right? And as soon as you put those gains on the leaderboard, you start to realize, man, this starts to work. If I just put my head down and continue doing what I'm doing, then there's a
inertia.
That's right. Yeah.
Look at that, jumping in there to save. It's like we're finishing each other's
sentences.
Words. Damn it. Almost got that one. And do you find there's a common area where new advisors get stuck? And this could be outside of the mindset that we just spoke about there, but are there like common traits, like maybe with a new customer they can't quite articulate themselves well enough, or they spend too long talking about certain things that aren't relevant?
Yeah, it's knowing when to reach out for help. It's having those avenues to do so, and being humble enough to do that. One of the things that I felt Blandon did very well with a lot of the advisors early on is he talked about the traits that you need to be aware of that he's seen makes good advisors. And one of those ones, a core part of it was humility. And if you can't foster humility in yourself to reach out when you need help or to say, I didn't do my best here, I could have done better, then there's no real way you can get over that to improve. So I think being humble is huge.
We talk about it all the time, the no ego approach to feedback, and it can be really confronting if you don't come from that type of environment. All of a sudden you're thrust into it. And I remember like even starting with Trail, and we're in a tiny little office. This is like 5.5, 6 years ago. And I'm doing like my first like sales calls, meetings, and I don't know a lot about, like the industry. I feel like I've had the basics, like I feel like I've been involved a little bit, but there's so much above my understanding that I have no idea about. And you're really quickly getting like fast feedback. The first few months is like really intense getting up to that level. I think like prior to that, I've never been in that type of environment, but now I don't think I could work in another way.
You don't get that chance often. So when you start in a new place, take the opportunity to be the fool. Right? The only way someone becomes an expert is by starting off as a fool. There's no starting off as an expert. So if you start in a new environment or there's new technologies or new things coming by that you have to be the fool. Ask the questions. It's much easier to be the fool early on than to pretend like you know and then later have to be humbled. It's much easier to go through that process. So start off humble. And go through that process every day.
Human nature is to, the river follows the easiest path. And I think that must be really challenging, especially if you're, a little bit older. You're not used to being bad at things because you've gone through your life, you know what you're good at, and you tend to focus more on those parts. And that means pushing, like compliance, for example, people bury their heads in the sand around it, when a lot of the time the compliance work isn't there just to keep you busy. It's just good business practice. A lot of that type of thing, people, if they just spend a little bit more time and engage with it, they'll feel so much more empowered. And that's across everything. It's not just like to do with the business.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm trying to learn guitar at the moment and I suck at it, but I'm enjoying getting better at it.
Yeah.
The fingers are finally getting callous. It doesn't hurt me every time I'm playing.
So you'll be doing a solo next can event. Is that what we're?
Yeah, as long as it's like Smoke on the Water or Three Little Birds, I'll be up there, man. I can't sing and play at the same time. I also can't sing, so I want to put you through that. I just want to come back to the training part because I think it's a really important part of MHQ's business, and I know that you've like bred some incredible advisors. Is there like, I know it's hard like picking out one big thing, but is there like a big unlock that you see advisors go from maybe just being like I don't want to say average, but standard to being that like next tier of advisor?
I keep coming back to the coachable aspect of that. Like we've had brilliant people come through that that hide in their brilliance, and it's a changing world. And you've got to be able to put yourself into a position where like, okay, I don't know everything. I'm not the big dog, and maybe I can learn from people under me, above me, in different industries. So being open to that. Yeah, and also that point I mentioned before about being in it. Right. So if you're a new guy, you've just done your level 5, you haven't purchased your first home yet, you should be asking yourself, if I'm asking my clients, you can do this and let's find a way, why aren't you doing that for yourself?
I want to talk about some key takeaways before we wrap things up. Just touching on the first part, and it would be, what are those non-negotiables per week? What would you say to somebody who's currently doing maybe like 20, 25 mil a year? They want to double that. What would you get them doing if you were working with them in your team?
Yeah. What I would do is I would look over the last 3 months of my calendar. No, this is assuming that you've actually put in your calendar what you do, right? But if you haven't, then maybe spend the next month, 2 months, 3 months, every single thing you do, put it into your calendar. if you look at my calendar, like people are like, what the heck? It's like everything I do. I've got breakfast, family, you know, like I get up, morning routine, you know, all these different things in there. And then when I look back and review, I know exactly the time I spent. So when I change and I go home early because I was sick or I need to go pick up my daughter or whatever happens, I change that in my calendar. I think it's important because you always need to review what's been done so that you can improve. That data set's really important. So have a time in your calendar, whether it's quarterly, every 6 months, once a year at least, you look at, say, what am I doing? What are the activities that are driving the business? And how can I outsource the rest of it? Right? If it's not fundamental to the advice process and you're the advisor, then make sure that you're doing more of those things that are moving the needle and work out how you can delegate the other parts better. So look at the last 3 months, go through the tasks, figure out what's the highest money makers, what's the most important, what are the ones you have to do, and just collate them in terms of what and organize them in that manner, and then organize and project your perfect week or your perfect month. And what does that look like? And this should always be evolving because your professional development should be changing as well. You might go from junior advisor to senior advisor, taking on different types of applications, which require different types of work. You may go from senior advisor to different parts in the business, for example. Or if you're wearing multiple hats, you want to be considering that as well. So it's both review the data, make sure that there's efficiencies in place and you're delegating outside of that, and that you set targets that you review over time as well. So that anchor, so to speak.
I love it. Beautifully put. And I want to come back to something I've discussed. I think I've discussed it previously in the podcast, but it is an exercise that we went through here, and it's called Delegate and Elevate. And the idea is that you put the key tasks that you do every single day into 4 boxes. It's love doing, good at. Like doing, good at. Hate doing it, but I'm good at it. And then hate doing it, and I'm bad at it. And anything that's in those don't like doing it categories, how can you set that up in a way where that's outsourced to somebody else in the team? And it might be hiring a support person and justifying that. It might be, delegating to somebody else within the team who needs to step up and take that responsibility.
Or delegating it to yourself, because you have to do it, like you're the advisor, but you do it in the morning and you eat the frog, right? Yeah. And so, I completely agree with that. And the one thing I missed that you reminded me of is not just the dollar figure and the importance, but the energy. What brings you energy every day? And monitor that as well physically. Like if you need to go for a run at 1 o'clock to really drive home those reviews in the evening, then do that. So yeah.
Love it. One last thing I want to talk about is when you first started in the industry, it can be really challenging initially because you're doing all the numbers and like maybe you're not quite getting that, maybe that inertia is not quite paying off yet. Was there a moment for you where like all that hard work paid off and you kind of just like popped out the other side and everything clicked into place?
There was definitely a moment where I like, okay, this what I'm doing here actually has worked. And I think that was the moment where I think we clicked up just under 40 million. I settled 40 million in a quarter, or just under 40 million. And that was a real moment for me saying, oh, okay, that actually works. It just takes a couple of quarters of hard work and consistency. But that was definitely a turning point. And since then, there's been a real refocus for me personally in my role. But what I would say is that you're not special. If you do the things that these others are doing and you focus on the areas that you're not good at, the results will come. And that may not necessarily translate exactly in the numbers, but if you're consistent, you will improve over time as well. So
Fantastic.
Keep at it.
And if people want to reach out for a coffee or, want to dive into something a little bit deeper, how do they find you?
Yeah, we've got the website, mhq.co.nz. I've got my phone number on there as well. Always keen to reach out with people in the industry and clients, obviously.
Just going to make sure they get it in your calendar in the right spot, though.
Yeah. We have some people to make some changes and move things around for
fantastic.
for the likes of you, Warwick.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, thank you. Feel very special. Dude, thanks so much for joining us today. I think there's some amazing takeaways in here. I think the type of content that this has produced for the industry will be super valuable, because there might be some little takeaways. People might not want to get to 100 million a year, and that's totally fine. But their goal, might be less, might be more than that. And some of these takeaways, I think, for sure will help them on that journey. So thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Dude, legend.